Bingo Blitz rules.
If your bingo has ads in it,
That's not a bingo.
if it doesn't have the coolest tournaments, mini games, and the most breathtaking design,
Nope, not a bingo.
if your bingo moment makes you feel so excited that you just want to burst in joy and scream out loud, bingo! Sorry, so you're playing...
Bingo Blitz? Now that's a bingo. Go for a world of excitement with Bingo Blitz, the #1 free bingo game. Download Bingo Blitz and play for free.
Now that's a bingo.
'Tis the season for shopping and hopefully scoring some great deals while you're at it. Which is great because with Rakuten, it's also the season for stacking up the savings. Use Rakuten to stack cash back on top of holiday sales at thousands of stores like Levi's, Best Buy, and Sephora. That's right, that's savings on top of savings. With Rakuten, you can save money on gifts for everyone on your list. From toys for the little one, to kitchen gear for the hostess with the mostest, to electronics for yourself. Shopping with Rakuten means you get to spend more time locating the perfect gift and less time trying promo codes that don't work. And did I mention that Rakuten is super easy to use? Just start your shopping at Rakuten.com or in the Rakuten app. Feel free to browse and shop just like you normally would, and then you get cash back by PayPal or check. It's truly a no-brainer. Join for free at Rakuten.com or download the Rakuten app. That's Rakuten. Rakuten.com.
Hey everyone, it's Anne from the Vulgar History Podcast. Before we get to today's episode, I just have an exciting announcement to make, which is that I'm going to be in Halifax, Nova Scotia towards the end of December. And I was thinking if there are Tits Up Brigade members who live there or live near there, that we could do a little meetup. So I'm just doing a little survey / RSVP if you're interested in joining this meetup, the first one in Canada. Go to vulgarhistory.com/meetup, vulgarhistory.com/MEETUP, and just fill in a survey for like what day and time might work best for you. And maybe we'll get the chance to hang out, sip some hot chocolate, and just like gossip about our favorite oldie-timey scandalous bitches. So again, just go to vulgarhistory.com/meetup if you're interested in joining me for a casual hang in Halifax, Nova Scotia towards the end of December. Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today I've got an author interview because this is a book that I think most of you, all of you, are going to be really hype about. It is a historical fiction novel with magical elements that is called A Rose by Any Other Name. The author is Mary McMyne, who you might know from her previous book, The Book of Gothel, which was a witchy book taking place in like medieval Germany. Anyway, this book, A Rose by Any Other Name, it's taking place in a time period that many of us know very well. It's a time period of when Shakespeare was around. Queen Elizabeth I is in power, and the main character of this is a real tits out lady named Rose. Mary's going to explain more about the story and the real history that inspired it, but I do just want to let you know before we listen to the episode that we're going to be talking about astrology. We're going to be talking about queer history. We're going to be talking about witchcraft. It's just like major things that this podcast embraces and is all about are all in this book. And so I think you're going to also really love hearing from Mary. And then I think you're all going to really love reading this book. So here's my chat with Mary McMyne, author of A Rose by Any Other Name. So we are joined today by Mary McMyne, author of the novel, historical fiction novel, A Rose by Any Other Name. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, Mary, explain who the Dark Lady is.
So the Dark Lady is the sort of muse of Shakespeare's sonnets. The sonnets themselves, when you read them in order, which not a lot of people do, they tell a story. The ending sonnets are all about this woman named, who scholars call the Dark Lady. And The sonnets are often taught like these are really romantic sonnets, that Shakespeare was very much in love with her. And he was kind of writing these sonnets against the popular love sonnets at the time that idealized this fair, standoffish, cruel woman. And he was writing to this woman who was sort of the antithesis of that. You know, she had dark hair, dark eyes, skin that was darker than this idealized woman. And the way I was taught to read them growing up was that he was romanticizing her. But when I was reading the sonnets, as I grew a little bit older, I noticed that there were some lines in them that seemed rather suspect, and they weren't as kind as the way that I had been taught to read them. When you read them in order and when you read them all together, you find out that there's like jokes that she gave him and the fair youth, the other muse in the sonnets, venereal disease. There are lots of comparisons of women's bodies to hell in them, and there's sort of all this stuff is sort of in the subtext, and people for a long time scholars were just sort of explaining all of that away and saying, oh no, these are great sonnets, and some of them are romantic, but others of them kind of read like the dark lady in my book calls them the spew of a jealous lover, as if they had a terrible fight, and he's kind of like writing off these really angry poems about her. So the more that I read them, the more that I wanted to know, if this was a real woman, what would her story be? What would she say about all this from her perspective? And that over time, I looked more closely, and I thought of this character, this woman who wanted to do this expose against Shakespeare and what he was really like.
And that's what your book is. Like, A
Yes.
Rose by Any Other Name is, her name is Rose, and she is telling her side of the story.
Yes.
And so, and this is all really, and you talk about this in your, I think it's in the afterword in your book, just kind of the history that this is based on, but it's a lot based on the sonnets themselves. Like, you're pulling information from there to build up this character. So what was that like going through the sonnets, just trying to find any hint of like, oh, she plays this instrument, or like, what was that like forensically examining them to build a character?
I really had a great time with that. I'm an English major, and I have a sort of love-hate relationship with the sonnets. Like I said, some of them are pretty beautiful, but they're kind of paired with these other ones. So I read the sonnets in order about 3 times, and I was sort of taking notes on who she might be, and I would like write the notes about what he said, and then I would like jot down notes about like what the truth would be. And that was a lot of fun. The book was conceived sort of like an angry correction. It was a lot of fun to write. So there's a lot of humor to it, but it was actually the most delightful thing that I've ever written, because I got to play a lot. Like I would take the details, like one of the first sonnets talks about her playing the virginal and the speaker wishing that he could be the keys beneath her fingers because he wants her to touch him so badly. Another one that everyone sort of knows is my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. And in that one, we get her physical description. And then they also tell a story as a whole. And I wanted to work that into the structure of the novel. And only about a little over 25 sonnets are about her. And the rest are about the fair youth, who is Shakespeare's other muse. And I wanted the novel to be sort of like that, where about, most of it was telling Rose's story. And then Shakespeare played this sort of smaller role that she's like subtly and then more obviously taking him down. So it was sort of like a subversion. It was super fun. Rose is a super fun character too.
Well, and talk about Rose and the whole witchcraft plot.
That actually comes from a line in the sonnets, and also like all of the references to hell in the sonnets. But there's this one line that he asks, "Oh, from what power hast thou this powerful might?" And he's talking about like her control over him. And that sort of gave me the idea, along with all the reference to witchcraft and Shakespeare, to sort of play with the ideas of about witchcraft that were popular during Elizabethan time, or that were popularly understood, not really popular.
Yeah. Can you talk about what, because this comes up in your book, like how witches were, like Shakespeare writes them in his play and it's like, ooh, this is like creepy and sexy. But in real life, if someone was accused of witchcraft, like what was that like?
So the Elizabethan era, they had lots of conceptions of magic, but witchcraft was one of the most reviled, and it wasn't the most dangerous time to be accused of witchcraft, but there were laws against witchcraft at that time, and you could be imprisoned for it. And oftentimes, the people who were accused of witchcraft, not just in Britain, but all across Europe, were people who didn't fit into society and people who, a lot of times, they were widows who didn't have the protection of a husband, and maybe like the family wanted the land back that the widow had control of. Or they would be people with differences that people didn't understand and they would be accused. Or they might be, maybe there were unexplained deaths. There was like a sickness that plagued cattle, and then a woman who was unpopular in the town, or maybe someone who was being supported by the church or by the town. They would accuse someone like that of it, kind of scapegoat her. The penalty was death, but it didn't often happen at that time. Like, it was possible, but it wasn't the most. There were other periods in time where people were constantly being burned and hanged.
Yeah, no,
but
like
that sort of came later.
Scotland
Yeah.
under James. But what I find really interesting about that, and this like comes across really strongly in your book, is there's kind of this sort of like witchcraft is illegal and whatever, but like everyone's into astrology. Like the Queen Elizabeth has an official astrologer, and your book has like so much astrology in it.
Yeah. So the way that I like to write my books, they're historical fiction, but they have speculative elements. They're sort of like light speculative elements that become more prevalent as the novel wears on. And I always write the magic as the beliefs of the period come to life. And so, in my first book, it was in medieval Germany in the 12th century. And so the witchcraft that people believe in then is the way that people would have believed it at the time. So when I first got the contract for this book, I was told that I proposed that I would write a retelling of the sonnets from the perspective of the Dark Lady, and my publisher put in the contract magic-infused story behind Shakespeare's sonnets from the perspective of the Dark Lady. And so I had to figure out how to infuse the book with magic. And it was actually pretty intimidating because there are so many different forms of magic during the Elizabethan era that people believed in. So there's astrology, there's alchemy, there's herbalism, there's flower magic. They even sort of believed in music as being like magic. So I wanted to try to figure out a way to incorporate all of that. And I had to read about like the history of magic to try to figure that out. And it turns out that astrology is like the umbrella sort of magic behind all of that. Alchemy is based on awakening elements in metals or in minerals, all these different parts of in elements that are controlled in some way by the stars, they have larger influence of some stars than others. And of course there's astrology, and there's summoning magic, which would also be more fortunate at certain times in the heavenly year than others. And then even herbalism was based on these sort of elements within plants that were, one plant would be more Martian and the other would be like influenced by Venus. So I just tried to incorporate all of that in the book in a subtle way. And that was a lot of fun too.
Yeah, like were you looking at like star charts and things like of the time?
Yes. Okay. So I really nerded out with star charts. Every single star chart in the book is true. There's an online astrolabe that you can use to like back calculate what the stars were in any period. So when Rose casts horoscopes, it's actually based on like she casts one for Henry Risley, the Earl of Southampton, who is the candidate for the fair youth that I went with in the book. And that is actually based on his birth date and on his the place where he was born. It also references her chart. She has a real, in my head, she has a real birth date, and that is her real chart. And her character is based off of the chart too. Shakespeare's character is based off of his chart. Henry's character really matched with his chart, but I didn't plan that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why it was all meant to be. The charts are all true. Yeah.
Surely. Yeah, that's one of the parts of the book that was so much fun. I wasn't like, I'd been interested in astrology, like I'm very interested in the history of magic. And so I was interested in it, but like to learn to read star charts in the old fashioned way, like it was super fun with an ephemeris and all of that. So
I just want to say, because this episode is coming out, in this like lead up to a time when people are buying a lot of books as presents, there's so many astrology people out there. And I feel like this would be a great gift for those people because they could then like double check your readings, and like the fact that you're not just making it up, that you like did that research, I think would appeal to a lot of people who are into that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was probably not necessary, but it was so much fun. That's how I roll.
So in terms of astrology too, and like your book is very much like this is Rose's story. Shakespeare is kind of there. It's not like her and him in lockstep for the whole book. Like he shows up very later on, but also in the same sort of way you're subverting. There's the character of John Dee, who I've never talked about on this podcast, but I know our mutual friend Allison Epstein is a big fan. And here you talk about John Dee, but also John Dee's wife. So I guess first, can you tell people if they don't know who John Dee is, like who is that and why was he cool?
So John Dee was the official astrologer who did elective astrology to help Queen Elizabeth choose the date of her coronation. He was also an alchemist, also a mathematician. He did a lot. He was very famous during his period. There are classical paintings of him, in a black cap and long black robe at his home casting alchemical experiments.
Does he have like a long beard as well? I just want to picture.
Yeah.
He's like Merlin vibes.
He looks like Merlin. Yeah. In the paintings he does, who knows what he was really like. But he was, long black robes doing an experiment. He's dropping some sort of powder. There's fire beneath it and the court is looking on. Like this is the legend of John Dee. And the truth of his life was that astrology was really popular at the beginning of Elizabeth's reign, but as fear of witchcraft and fear of the Queen's life and different kinds of magic became more and more prevalent, his fortunes in England waned. And there's a point at which he sort of stopped getting as much money from the Queen and had to do other things there, and even traveled across the sea to Europe with his sort of grifter scryer, Edward Kelly, to go try to entrance other rulers of countries to pay them to do alchemy and discover the Philosopher's Stone.
He reminds me of sort of like more oldie-timey Rasputin sort of guy. Just kind of like very charismatic, very like mystical, very like, oh, I'm just going to go be friends with like the monarch and see how that does.
Yeah.
And then he had a wife and she's in your book.
Yeah. So I researched John Dee and he had a very intricate diary. The entries are not super long. They're pretty short for every day, but he kept it for, years at a time, where he wrote down what happened that day and the important things. And there hasn't been, I don't think there are many portrayals of her in fiction at all, but there's a really sad story about something that happened between them. Also with this guy, Edward Kelly, who, I don't know if maybe I should talk about that. Do you want me to?
Well, you mentioned he was a grifter, and that is intriguing to me.
Yeah. So John Dee, one of his big magical projects was trying to talk to angels to get advice on how to achieve alchemical enlightenment and also turn metals into gold. And he searched throughout his life for scryers who could actually contact angels. He had a crystal ball. He had a showing stone, like this black Aztec mirror sort of thing, and they would try to contact the angels in there and get advice. So Edward Kelly was the scryer who John Dee thought was most successful. He was a real asshole. He wasn't very trustworthy, and John Dee knew that. They had a very rocky relationship, but he put up with it because Edward Kelly was able to contact the angels, and Edward Kelly even helped him write down the angelical language that the angels spoke in. But Edward Kelly was constantly getting arrested. In that painting I talked about, he actually has ear flaps over the place where his ears would have been. He's standing in the background, but he has ear flaps over the place where his ears would have been, because they were cut off as punishment for something that no one knows what he did. I think it was in Lancaster. So this guy arrested in England. Later, when they go to Prague, he stays on, and John Dee and him have an argument that we can talk about. But Edward Kelly stays, and then soon is imprisoned by the emperor because he's constantly promising things that he never follows through on. And later, John Dee would even be like, this guy he couldn't deliver. He was lying. He was just a grifter. So.
And what does that have to do with the wife?
So, I imagine that Jane Dee must have really hated Edward Kelly, because this guy was always at their house, always locked in her husband's study, trying to summon angels and, convincing John Dee that he was, right? And like I said, he was well known to have this very difficult personality. And then later on, whenever they were overseas in Bohemia, there's an entry in John Dee's diary that says that he talked about his wife and Joan, Edward Kelly's wife. And it says something like, talking about Kelly's wife, she came to us and we rushed not from her. And there were a lot of rumors about what happened at that time. And basically what historians say happened is that Edward Kelly got really frustrated with John Dee, and in order to kind of break off relations between them for good, he convinced John Dee that an angel had told Edward that the two of them were supposed to share everything, even their wives. And John Dee, at first he completely balked at the idea, and Jane definitely balked at the idea. But Edward Kelly, there was additional conversations with angels. Finally, John Dee was convinced, and then the wives were sort of coerced to go along with this. And there was an assault, and then rumor had it that there was later her young son was conceived around that time, and some speculate that was Edward Kelly's son and not John Dee's. And then after that, pretty soon after that, they all split up and everybody went their separate ways. So it's a pretty horrifying story. And when I read, I was researching John Dee, and most of what you read about John Dee, I think there are a few fictional portraits that portray him in a negative light. But historically, most of what you read about John Dee is like, poor John Dee. He was the astrologer for the queen, and then his fortune waned. And at a certain point, he was even like convicted of witchcraft for doing a sort of astrology that wasn't allowed. And then I read about this and I was like, why does no one talk about this? This is horrible. And I wanted to write it from her perspective. So I wrote John Dee. Actually, Rose is an astrologer. She casts horoscopes for people, and she does rituals that are healing. Both they're both physical things that her mother does to heal ailments, but then Rose and her mother also do this ritual that helps women overcome hurt. And so Jane hears about that and she comes to Rose, and I show her explaining what happened, and then Rose and her mother helping her start to heal from it with a ritual.
And now for a quick advertising break.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. This time of the year can be full of cozy nights in with mugs of hot chocolate, and it can also be a difficult season for a number of reasons. Whether the holidays come with complicated feelings, or the longer, colder nights make it more difficult to find your motivation, it's important to lean on the things that bring you comfort. And no matter the season, therapy is a great tool to help you feel your best. When I first started therapy, it was around this time of the year, which I'm sure I'm not alone in. For me, therapy has become one of the most important things I do to take care of myself. And I find I need a little extra care in the winter months, whether I need to dive into a specific issue or just feel less alone in what I'm going through. If you're thinking of trying or returning to therapy, BetterHelp is a great option. It's easy to get started. You just take a brief questionnaire to be matched with a licensed therapist. And if you have a busy schedule, that's no problem. BetterHelp is entirely online, so it's truly designed to be flexible and fit into your life. You can find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/vulgar today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/vulgar. For many businesses, the holiday season can be both an exciting and stressful time. With so many balls in the air, one thing you definitely want to know you can rely on is how you're selling your products. And with Shopify, you can rest easy knowing it's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. And when it comes to successful brands like Aloe, Allbirds, or Skims, an often overlooked secret is all the things that go on behind the scenes that make selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, if you take a peek behind that curtain, you'll see that Shopify is what makes it all possible. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. So that's more happy customers and way more sales going. It's true all the time, but especially this time of year, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use for Realm merch with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
There's a lot going on right now. Mounting economic inequality, threats to democracy, environmental disaster, the sour stench of chaos in the air. I'm Brooke Gladstone, host of WNYC's On the Media. Want to understand the reasons and the meanings of the narratives that led us here, and maybe how to head them off at the pass? That's On the Media's specialty. Take a listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast, Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us and lose yourself in someone's only one story. The Only One in the Room has a wide variety of guests, from prisoners to abuse survivors to swingers. With 21 seasons and counting, we guarantee that Only One in the Room will have a story that you'll connect with. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back. Another aspect of your book, like, I appreciate that, like, the way that the elevator pitch of your book is like, what's the Dark Lady? What would her story be? And like Shakespeare again is in this book, but this is not like the love story of Shakespeare and Rose. Like, he shows up quite late in the book. The love story is a different love story. It's a sapphic love story. And can you talk about that love story, but also what research you did about like queer people in this era?
Yeah.
Because Shakespeare, like the whole fair youth, like people speculate that was him in a male-male relationship too.
For a long time, so I'll talk about the fair youth sonnets first. There's a sequence of sonnets. There's 3 sections of them. The first 17 sonnets are like the speaker trying to convince this fair youth to get married and have children. And there's a lot of speculation around those being a commission that were paid by someone. And then something happens at sonnet 18, and it really turns from this very formal argument to try to convince this youth something to get married and have children. It turns to being really a love story. And the sonnet 18 is a really beautiful sonnet. It's Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? And I love the way that first sonnet is like a question, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Almost like he's very tentative about asking, like, can I do this, right? And then from there, the sonnets show things like the speaker kind of staring at the ceiling at night, like wishing that he was around the fair youth, like just longing for him. Others of them show this jealous relationship between the fair youth and the dark lady. And so just like people for a long time tried to say the Dark Lady sonnets were romantic, people tried to say for a long time that the fair youth was just a friend. Because there is the word friend like does appear a few times in the sonnets, but when you read all of them, it's very clear that like the speaker is falling deeper and deeper in love. And the sonnets as a sequence are definitely a bisexual sequence of sonnets. And so because of that, I definitely wanted to write Shakespeare as bisexual. There's a lot of play with gender in his plays and sexuality. And that was something that I was definitely drawn to. So in order to write that story, and in order to write Rose's story, like I wanted to portray queer people in Elizabethan England, and I wanted to let Rose have a romance of her own that was, similar to the fair youth, where she was struggling with falling in love with someone of the same sex. And so from that, I created the idea of Cecily, who is the main love interest in the book and sort of the person who Rose is having a healthy relationship with. It's based on true love as opposed to this really rocky, intense, and at times toxic relationship with Shakespeare that happens later. Like, I wanted to write him as, I wanted their relationship to be sexy, but I wanted it to be deeply problematic. So Cecily is Rose's respite and true love, even though it takes a while for them to admit their feelings and be together. So in order to write both of those love stories, both Shakespeare and the Fair Youth and Rose and Cecily, I did need to research queer people in the Elizabethan era. And there's a whole lot about homosexual relationships, love between men and sex between men. There were laws on the books that was illegal. There were people who were imprisoned for it. But there aren't a lot of references to lesbian relationships at the time. So I had to dig into feminist and queer scholarship to like find references to it in letters, where one woman would write to another, and you could definitely tell that they had that they were in love. And again, there weren't a lot of references. There weren't any laws on the books.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I forget what time period it was, but we've talked about this in the podcast before, where it's like people writing the laws, they didn't want young women to get pregnant out of wedlock, basically. But they wouldn't have thought that a woman and another woman would have sex, so they wouldn't make a law about it, because that would presumably, generally, not result in a child outside of wedlock. So it's kind of like, who cares?
Yeah. I mean, or our mutual friend Allison said she doesn't think people could conceive of sex without a penis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they just so there's not, which is not to say that these relationships didn't happen, but like the male stuff, like there's so many, like there's laws and writings about that, but women is just kind of like meh. Like exactly. Like if people just can't conceive sex without a penis, then it's just like, well. So there's not a lot, but then it's not written about, but we know it was happening. So yeah, so you just had to kind of dive into what was that like.
I had to read between the lines in letters and sort of get the idea. And there are books that I read about this just to sort of get a feel for how the relationships would have taken place and how they would have been received at the time.
Well, and I'm almost thinking like, I'm thinking of Shakespeare's plays. And like you mentioned before, like there's so much gender play and stuff in those. But, like in Twelfth Night, there's the sequence where Viola is in disguise as a man. And then Olivia falls in love with her. And she's like, oh, no, she's like, there's like, and that's too, well, it would have been a man playing both roles in Shakespeare's time, which adds a whole other level of things to it. But like there is the fact that those plays were popular, like the audience was aware that same-sex attraction could occur because that's part of the humor of the plays.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The one for a really long time, my favorite play was As You Like It. And the names, one of the things I tried to do with the book was pull things from Shakespeare's plays. I know as a writer, for me, I do not, I write fiction. I do not write novels that are true. I'm not my main characters, but I always draw inspiration for my life. And I wanted this story to kind of show like what the inspiration for certain aspects of Shakespeare's plays might be. And As You Like It has Rosalind and Celia. And that is sort of, they're one of the most famous bisexual characters in Shakespeare's plays. And that, or potentially bisexual or through subtext bisexual, however you want to look at it. And that's where I drew Rose and Cecily's names. And yeah, they're portrayed as cousins in the book, but there's a line about them being as close as Juno's swans, which, adds a whole layer there.
Yeah. And so I do want to emphasize for everybody that your book has got astrology, very well-researched astrology. Your book has got like queer stuff in it. Your book has got a sapphic love story and also Shakespeare stuff. So I feel like those are, a lot of the listeners are like, those are their three main things. So this is like the perfect book to be talking about on this podcast. And it came out, how long ago did it come out? Over the summer?
It came out this summer, yeah, in July.
And have you heard from readers, like how they've responded to it?
Yeah. I mean, people were really excited about the fact that I was portraying Shakespeare in a way that was more realistic and less glorified than a lot of people have done. There's an apocryphal story about Shakespeare that someone wrote down in his time, that he basically stole one of Richard Burbage's groupies in a way that was pretty roguish, and people like that. Shakespeare is sort of, I'm trying to think of how to explain it.
You show Shakespeare being sort of like a dirtbag instead of like a great man of history. And I
Yeah.
appreciate that too, because I
Yeah.
think he was. And to
Yeah.
pretend that he was this like fantastical, legendary, iconic person, it's like, no, he was a shitty person. Like so many people, like we all are in ways. But I mean, like he had a wife, but that didn't stop him from fucking around with lots of people. But that doesn't mean he didn't write good plays. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So, and his early plays are really problematic in the way they portray women. I think he gets better at portraying women as his life goes on. But this is taking place at that time, and he really had to be a dirtbag in order to write these sonnets. And people are excited about the idea that the book focuses on her. You know, that it's not like you said, it's not her story of her love story with Shakespeare. It is her own story and how she got to the place where he wrote this story down in the poems.
Well, there's this whole, I'm sure there's this whole sort of genre of fiction that's like the wife of so and so, the like daughter of so and so, where it's just like taking a famous man in history and then writing a novel that's like, but what was his wife like? And so I like that your book sort of isn't that. It's not called like, I don't know, his muse or whatever. It's just kind of like, well, who is she as a person? And her involvement with Shakespeare was not the defining function of her life. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think at one point in recent history, those books were like a good way to get us started talking about women in history. And like, thank goodness we've come further than that now. And we can talk about, the lives of women, the secret love lives of women, the ambitions of women. And that's another thing that people are really excited about with the book. Rose wants more than anything to be a musician. And that's the reason she goes, there are other, I won't spoil it, but there are other reasons she goes to London, but that's why she has a dream of going to London, is that she wants to be a musician. She wants to be known for her art, and she has her own drive.
I also appreciate the way that Rose, that you portray her very upfront about her sexuality. There's been this, I don't know, by the time this episode comes out, there's been an ongoing discussion that I've been reading on social media talking about how women sometimes in historical, I guess especially historical romance, which your book is not, but in historical fiction showing like, oh, women inaccurately showing like, oh, like women didn't know what sex was, women were so sheltered, like, and shouldn't we go back to that today, is like the terrible conversation, where your book is just like, no, people had sex, people knew this stuff, women, like all people's story were not the same. There were some people who might not have known stuff, but I like the portrayal of Rose as somebody who just like is sexually active and she's unapologetic about it, and she's just like going out there doing her thing, like a lot of women have been throughout all of history, and I appreciated that.
Yeah. To say that there weren't women who were unabashedly sexual is a very strange way of looking at history. And to say that, I don't understand that at all, because people are people, like there's so much evidence. Women have sex drives, and there's even in the period, there was a debate over like the unhealthy strong sex drive of some women, and there were even astrological explanations for why some women were that way, that their humors were out of balance, but obviously that was all very natural. And that was one of the reasons that Rose was a lot of fun to write. She does a lot of things that are subversive, and she doesn't apologize for it. And she's complicated, and she has flaws. And I loved writing a woman like that in a historical piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is so, like, it's just funny we're talking about this, because I was just reading this discussion yesterday. I think Courtney Milan, the romance novelist, was just sort of explaining that like women in history have not always been pure, delicate flowers. And it's weird to presume that of every, like, there's certain tropes in romance novels that people lean into, and that's fine. But like, if one of the points that she made that I think we've talked about in this podcast before too, is like, if women were inherently supposed to be like submissive and non-sexual, then it's like, well, then why are there so many laws forcing women to be like that? Like, if that was naturally how women were, why would there have to be laws
Yeah, there are
forcing
even
that.
right. There are even so many jokes in Shakespeare's plays about cuckoldry. About and then there's Taming of the Shrew, which I really once upon a time. This is the story of my life with Shakespeare stuff. Like, I loved Taming of the Shrew as a young person because, like, oh my God, strong woman. But then as a much older, I had to go back and reread it because one of the things I played with is that Katerina is sort of the inspiration for Rose's mother. There's like a few things and Rose is also part of the inspiration for her as well. And I had to go back and read Taming of the Shrew, and parts of it are really funny. And the relationship between Katerina and Petruchio is at times, I hate to admit it, it's almost compelling. Like, their banter is really witty and there's like a magnetic attraction between them that's fun to read. But when you get to Act 4, it is like a primer in gaslighting. Like, it is so disturbing to read Act 4 in the year of our Lord 2024. Like, oh my God, that is like a scary thing to read. Yeah, but again, in that play, Katerina is this strong woman, and there's a lot of like, I think we were talking about sex, and I sort of went off the subject, but
no, but yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about, like with Shakespeare's plays, like they're so widely discussed, they're so widely read, but what, like you mentioned, so for instance, like in the sonnets, like you can see the changing relationships between him and the fair youth, between him and the dark lady, if those were in fact his experiences and not like a meta narrative that he was experimentally doing. But in his plays, like you said, like you can see the female characters, he starts writing better female characters if you look chronologically at the plays that he's writing. And so it makes sense to presume like maybe he had more interactions with different kinds of women and he found inspiration in that. And he's like, oh, women can be different kinds of people. And so like that's kind of a bit of what he gets from the relationship with Rose in your book as well, which is funny to me. The reverse. I'm very familiar with the movie Shakespeare in Love, which is like a very different Shakespeare love story,
right.
With a very blonde person. But it's funny to think like how he finds inspiration in that, and then in your book, it's a much more like down to earth how he finds inspiration, and not just in this like pure, beautiful love story, but it's kind of like toxic, weird, messed up love story.
Yeah, that was they meet in a brothel. She is playing at a brothel and they meet there, and it is one of the things that I tried to write was that like strangely compelling but sexy relationship between but also disturbing relationship between Petruchio and Katerina. Like, I wanted to show like how they could be attracted to each other at first, but then like it slowly goes awry.
yeah, like so many relationships do in life,
right?
So your book is called A Rose by Any Other Name, and it's available all over the place. Actually, do you know, like, a lot of people listening are in like US and Canada. Is it in other countries too, or do you know?
Yeah, it is in North America, and there's a World English version as well. So you can get it in Great Britain. That version is also published in Australia. So you really should be able to find it anywhere.
In all kinds of different places. And where can people find you? Are you online at all?
I am, yes. I am very easy to find. I am at marymcmyne.com, and then on all the social media that I am on, I am just at Mary McMyne, and I'm on Instagram, Threads, and old school, I'm on Facebook. I was once on X, but no longer, and I am a very text-based person, so I am not on TikTok.
I respect that heartily. I tried TikTok for a minute. It was not for me.
Yeah.
But all love and all respect to people for whom it is for them.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. It's just me. It's
That's perfect. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today about your book.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
So, as Mary said, you can find a copy of this book in all English-speaking countries. So you should pick up a copy for yourself and or as a present for whoever you love the most or your enemy this gift-giving season, because it's just such a good book and everybody should read it. And yeah, so next week on the podcast on Vulgar History, we're going to be having our annual holiday special episode. For the holidays, if you've been listening for a while, I've fallen into a tradition where we do a historical biography episode around the holidays, and it's somebody whose life is not super depressing. It's a story that is, I think you're going to enjoy, you're going to be excited by who my guest is next week, and you're going to be really excited about the story. And it's just kind of like, I know that this is a time that some people are stressed out, some people are feeling lots of other emotions. And so Vulgar History is here for you with a story of somebody who overcame all of life's problems. And also next week, it's a person who did a lot of stabbing, and I think you're going to like that. So in the meantime, in the terms of like gift giving season, there's lots of Vulgar History things that you can ask to be given by people who are giving you gifts, or that you can give to people who are fans of the podcast, or if you just want to confuse somebody who's not yet a fan of the podcast. And so some things you can consider are, so I do have a Substack, which first of all, you can join for free. Like I just post free newsletters. That's cool. That's fine. You can do that. We're at vulgarhistory.substack.com. That's where I post kind of like feminist rants and biographies of women in history and stuff like that. And, or if you want to get a paid membership to that, you can. And actually, if you get a paid membership right now, the annual membership is 50% off, which works out to something like $4 a month if you want to support me and the podcast and my newsletter in that way. Or if you want to gift that to somebody, what a nice gift that would be. You can also support the podcast on Patreon. First of all, for free. I'm posting content there for all the free members. Like, I see you, I respect you, I love having you there. Like, I post sort of value-added content from the episodes, like pictures of the people that we're talking about and stuff like that, poll questions, just like links to interesting articles you would like. That's all available to all the free members at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And then if you want to buy yourself a paid membership, guess what? It's 30% off if you want to become a paid member of the podcast, of the Patreon. So $1 less 30% a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes. And then for $5 less 30%, you get access to the bonus episodes as well. So that's Vulgar Peace Theater. So this asshole, and also the after show, which I've just posted a new episode of the after show where I'm talking with friend of the podcast, Allison Epstein, about a movie that she and I both had to excitedly yell about to each other. It's the movie Conclave, about the elderly men in the Vatican scheming to be who's going to be the new pope. It's such a good movie. Anyway, if you want to hear me and Allison talking about that, that's available to all members of the Patreon at the $5 a month or more level. So I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you right now, but basically, go to patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. If you want to join for free, you can. If you want to get a free 7-day trial, you can. If you want to subscribe for the annual thing, you use code VULGAR, VULGAR, to get 30% off your annual subscription to my Patreon. And also at that $5 or more a month level, that's where you get to join the community Discord, which is where Tits Out Brigade members are providing emotional support for each other, sharing pictures of our cats and our dogs and our other pets, recommending books and movies and stuff. It's just like a giant group chat, and that's available to anybody at the $5 a month or more level. And you can also gift a Patreon membership to somebody. So you can ask your loved ones to give you a gift subscription to Vulgar History. And that's the thing you can do. You go to patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter/gift, and that takes you to the thing to get a gift subscription. And also our brand partner, Common Era Jewelry, an amazing company that I love supporting. I'm really excited to continue working with them. And actually, Tori, the owner, she's got some really exciting new designs coming out next year. And I'm really excited for when we get to tell you about those. So Common Era Jewelry is a small business. It's a woman-owned business that makes beautiful heirloom jewelry pieces inspired by classical history, classical mythology, and where we connect with them the most is women from history. And so their collection includes pieces with women from mythology, like Artemis is there, Clytemnestra, Hecate, like lots of Medusa. I think she was recently posting that ever since the results of the recent American election, there's been a real uptake in people getting Medusa inspired pieces, which I like that energy. I like that. Let's just turn some people into stone with our snake hair energy. Also, there's real women from history who we've talked about on this podcast, like Hatshepsut is there, Anne Boleyn, Agrippina, Cleopatra, Boudica, and their pieces are available in solid gold as well as in more affordable gold vermeil. And if you're buying something for yourself, or if you're putting this on your wish list for someone to buy it for you, make sure they know that you can get 15% off your order from Common Era by going to commonera.com/vulgar or using code VULGAR at checkout at commonera.com. And then, of course, for the Tits Out Brigade member in your life, and maybe that person is you, there's Vulgar History merchandise, which is available for Americans at vulgarhistory.com/store. Or if you're outside the US, go to vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. We're talking about the friend hath need of this, or whatever that saying is. We have that on like tote bags, on t-shirts. We have the Peg Plunkett's Pub. We have the beautiful Vulgar History, not taking history seriously since 2019, crew neck, like varsity style shirt. We have Francis Howard, Titties Outies. We have John Knox, the ghost of John Knox saying whores. It's just lots of inside jokes. And then also the holiday design by our friend Karen Moynihan that says "Tits the Season," and it looks like an embroidered jumper. And the design are lots of little breast imagery. Anyway, Vulgar History merch, you can get it at vulgarhistory.com/store in America and vulgarhistory.redbubble.com in elsewhere. And if you want to get in touch with me, please do, especially if you go on holiday somewhere and you see a picture of a thing that has to do with someone we've talked about on the podcast. We've covered so many people in America. I just wanted to mention, for a long time, we hadn't talked about America, but now we have. And I'm excited that people are sending me pictures who live around some of the places where any of those people hung out. If you're in, Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, where Peggy Shippen's family is from, or whatever, send me a picture of a sign because it delights me, and I like seeing these places. You can get in touch with me if you go to vulgarhistory.com. My email address is there, or you just fill the form and it sends an email to me, the little form. You can also keep up with me on social media. I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm on Threads, all at Vulgar History Pod. And yeah, next week, holiday special. Get your stabbing knives ready. It'll be a piratey good time. And until then, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, written, and hosted by Anne Foster. That's me. The editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. The Vulgar History Show image is by Deborah Wong. Transcripts are written by Aveline Malik. Find transcripts of recent episodes at vulgarhistory.com.
Buffet brawlers, glory holes gone wrong, cannibalistic castration cabins, public poopers? These are just a few of the crazy topics you'll hear covered on Excuse Me, That's Illegal, the pettiest podcast around. Whether you need a break from all that murdery true crime stuff, or just enjoy hearing hilarious stories told in a unique way, I got what you need. I'm Leroy Luna, your fearless host/chauffeur. So come hop in my minivan and let's go for a ride. I promise you probably won't be disappointed. Excuse Me, That's Illegal is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, basically everywhere you consume podcasts, with new episodes dropping on the 10th, 20th, and 30th of the month, baby!
Nowadays, trends and news cycles change faster than we can blink. But there are some things that withstand the test of time. And if you're looking for a connection to something timeless, and maybe also a glimpse of life at a slower pace, I believe everyone can relate to the very human experiences explored in Jane Austen's novels. And that's where I come in. My name is Alison Larkin. I'm a writer, comedian, and narrator and host of the Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin. I spent a lot of my childhood in the part of England where Jane Austen lived and wrote, and now that I live in the States, nothing gives me a sense of homecoming quite like narrating her books. On this show, you'll listen to award-winning narration. I'll give myself a pat on the back for that, as well as conversations with actors, writers, and other fascinating people who all share a passionate love for Jane Austen. So please, join me as we embark on a wonderful journey through Jane Austen's work. Be sure to listen and subscribe to The Jane Austen Podcast with Alison Larkin, wherever you get your podcasts.
Ladies and gentlemen.
What are you doing?
What do you mean?
Just keep it simple.
I'm making the promo.
Just keep it simple. Just say, hey, we're the Brav Bros. Two guys that talk about Bravo.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're the Brav Bros.
No.
Oh.
Dude, stop with the voice. Just keep it simple.
I've seen promos on TV, dude. This is how you get the fans engaged. This is how you get listeners. We're trying to get listeners here. If we just say, oh, we're two dudes that talk about Bravo, people are going to get tired of it already. We need some oomph.
All right, then fine. Let's try to do it with your voice.
Brav Bros.
Good job.